Have you ever wondered how world leaders acquire and maintain power? Why do they decide to invade certain countries? Why do they sometimes seem to blatantly lie to their constituents and somehow still get away with it? It would seem as if they're driven by some demonic entity taking actions at random for the sake of pure evil. However, it may surprise you that there is actually a method to the madness, and this has been known for thousands of years. One of the best works on acquiring and maintaining power has been written by Nicolo Machiavelli. And after you watch this video, you will know exactly why world leaders and dictators behave the way they do. Even if you're not interested in politics, it is imperative for you to know these principles because, like it or not, you will encounter people who will use these in your workplace or even to influence your family. With the knowledge of these principles, you'll be able to see through the matrix and who knows, maybe acquire some power for yourself and beat these people at their own game. It is better to be feared than loved if one cannot be both. Nicolo Machiavelli. When Machiavelli wrote The Prince, it was meant to serve as a handbook for a prince to gain and keep power. Machiavelli's The Prince might seem too political or too outdated for modern consumption, but this is not the case. While the book is directed at a prince, its concepts are still applicable today. Acquiring power. Machiavelli believes that people are unreliable and unpredictable, and their goals will shift without warning. When advising princes who wish to found their kingdom from the ground up and on their own, he emphasizes the ability to be self-dependent and the willingness to use force. Machiavelli believes that it is impossible to hold on to power with peaceful means alone. The nature of people is variable, and while it is easy to persuade them, it is difficult to maintain them in that persuasion. It is necessary to, when they no longer believe, to make them believe by force. For princes who acquire the kingdom by usurping the previous ruler, Machiavelli advises swiftly crippling the opposition in one sweep. In the modern context, this might explain the behavior of executives after a hostile corporate takeover or the appointing of new government officials after the elections. Machiavelli says the prince should assess all threats and eliminate them in one stroke rather than doing it every other day. If the usurper can inflict this pain in one swoop, he will avoid unsettling the people and reassure them instead. Machiavelli writes, "For injuries ought to be done all at one time, so that, being tasted less, they offend less. Benefits ought to be given little by little, so that the flavor of them may last longer." If you want to control people, do not punish them every day, and when you provide benefits, do so in a controlled manner so they keep coming back. Intermittently rewarding them will keep them guessing when the next breadcrumb will fall, which keeps them loyal. To acquire power, Machiavelli advises strategy over cruelty and gives the case of Agathocles, the Sicilian who killed all the senators and wealthy men of Syracuse to gain the princedom. Machiavelli does not explicitly approve of this violence, as he writes, "It cannot be called talent to slay fellow citizens, to deceive friends, to be without faith, without mercy, without religion. Such methods may gain empire, but not glory." So as a side note, I would like to add, a lot of people believe that Machiavelli is just about pure evil. I don't personally think it's about pure evil. It's just about the practicality of power. While Agathocles displayed the greatness of mind in enduring and overcoming hardships, his barbarous cruelty and inhumanity, marked by infinite wickedness, did not earn him glory. Machiavelli gives more examples of such individuals who seize kingdoms through war. He argues that their success emerges from their ability to wield such violence in one blow to acquire the state, but seize the violence afterwards and only use it when advantageous to maintaining security. Once this violence has served its purpose, the prince should be consistent among his subjects. While human nature is unreliable, a prince's nature should be reliable. This means that he should be able to enact harsh measures without stepping out of his character. It means being prepared to act swiftly if needed. If the prince is always too gentle, when he acts aggressively, the people will feel betrayed and will find the action out of character for the prince. On maintaining power, Machiavelli believed that people were unreliable. He advised princes to be self-reliant. He believed that the strength of a state could be measured based on how well, in times of need, the prince can support himself with his own resources rather than depending on the assistance of others. A prince should be powerful and courageous. His city must be fortified for defense and even for a siege. He should have enough military power to drive away his enemies. And if he should fall under a siege, the prince should have his city well fortified to keep his subjects safe so that his enemies would be locked outside and eventually be driven away with disgrace. A powerful prince must be able to give his subjects hope that the bad times will not last for long. Also, he should know when to protect himself from his own subjects should they become too bold or too agitated. Power can be maintained through the prince's own soldiers, mercenaries, and auxiliaries. Machiavelli advises against using mercenaries and auxiliaries because they are ambitious and without discipline. Such people are unfaithful and have no loyalties to their masters or God. Their loyalties to money and themselves, and when the battle is over, they turn against the prince. As Machiavelli writes, destruction is deferred only so long as the attack is, for in peace one is robbed by them and in war by the enemy. People whose loyalty is money cannot be trusted to die for the prince in battle, and when things get tough, they will desert him. If the mercenaries are too skilled, they will likely aspire to usurp the prince, and even if they are not skillful, they will lose on the battlefield. The prince cannot be secure unless he has his own army for defense and offense when necessary. On going to war, Machiavelli believes that a prince should always be thinking about war. When princes have thought more of ease than of arms, they have lost their states. Power is acquired through war and is lost when one neglects the art of war. An unarmed prince is never secure and is often despised, and those who are armed will never yield obedience willingly to an unarmed one. If the prince does not excel in the art of war, both in study and action, he loses the respect of his men. Such a prince does not have allies with other states, for they view him as weak and suspicious. The prince should learn about war from his predecessors, who were successful. He should educate himself and his men through drills and practices, even when there is no war. On virtue and human nature, Machiavelli advises that every prince should know how to use what others consider wrong and use it properly. Idealism has no place in the acquisition and maintenance of power because, as Machiavelli writes, how one lives is so far distant from how one ought to live. If the prince is caught up in what should and shouldn't be done, he will be destroyed. One cannot simply act purely based on virtue while ignoring the existence of evil. He will end up destroyed by that evil. A prince should be able and willing to commit evil as necessity demands. A prince should have the wisdom to know when virtue can lead to his ruin and when something deemed immoral could bring security and prosperity to his kingdom. On this subject, Machiavelli advises a prince to choose fear over love. While every prince should strive to be known as merciful rather than cruel, he should not misuse his clemency. Being too merciful can lead to disorders and eventually robberies and murders within the state. Therefore, if a prince can keep order, unity, and loyalty of his subjects, he should not fear the reproach of cruelty. A prince should strike a balance between cruelty and mercy. When deciding between mercy and cruelty, Machiavelli acknowledges that a prince might wonder whether it is better to be loved than feared, or feared than loved. To this, Machiavelli responds that a prince must aspire to have both love and fear from his subjects, for it is difficult to unify people with one without the other. However, if one of these must be dispensed with, the prince must choose fear over love. Machiavelli advises princes to choose fear over love because human nature is unreliable. He writes, "Men are ungrateful, fickle, false, cowardly, covetous, and as long as you succeed, they are entirely yours. But when the need approaches, they turn against you." If a prince purely relies on the promises of the subjects and neglects other alternatives, he will fall when people break their promises. When a prince obtains friendships through payment, rather than by greatness or nobility, he cannot trust these friendships, for when the need arises, they will fail. It is better to be feared by your subjects than loved, because people are less likely to let someone down they fear. The people are less likely to offend a feared prince. Also, as Machiavelli points out, love is preserved by the link of obligation that can be broken when it's advantageous for the people, but fear will preserve the prince because people will be terrified of the possibility of punishment. However, the prince needs to ensure that while he inspires fear, it does not become hate. He should not steal from his subjects, and when he has to execute one of them, he should do so under proper justification. However, the prince should foster a reputation of cruelty amongst his army, which is the only way to hold an army together. Machiavelli concludes the answer to this question by stating, "Men love according to their own will and fear according to that of the prince. A wise prince should establish himself based on what he can control and not what is under the control of others, and only endeavor to avoid hatred. You cannot make people love you, but you can make them fear you. As far as Machiavelli is concerned, this is just practical." On religion and power. A prince that keeps the faith and lives with integrity is praised. However, Machiavelli writes that princes who have achieved great things had little faith but used strategy to outwit the intellect of others, which made them winners over those who relied on faith. Power can be achieved through law or the use of force. The law is rarely sufficient, which necessitates the use of force, requiring the prince to be half man and half beast and to unleash each as necessity demands. Machiavelli believes that men are not purely good but are inherently bad and will not act in good faith with the prince. For this reason, the prince should not keep faith when the initial reasons why he joined no longer exist and when some aspect of his faith can be used against him. Instead, he should learn to disguise his faithlessness, and this will be simple because men are so simple and so subject to present necessities that he who seeks to deceive will always find someone who will allow himself to be deceived. On religion and virtue, Machiavelli concludes that it is not necessary for a prince to have virtue or good qualities, but it is necessary that he appears to have them. The appearance of being virtuous is more important than actually being virtuous. A good prince should know that having all these virtues and good qualities and exercising them can be detrimental, but appearing to have them is more useful. A good prince should appear merciful, upright, faithful, religious, and human, but with a mindset that allows him to change the opposite if the need arises. Machiavelli's teaching on religion and morality is that a prince does not have to act in accordance with virtue. Taking vicious actions is sometimes indispensable for the good of the state. He points out that sometimes virtue can be a burden to a prince, and the appearance of virtue might be better than virtue itself. He advises the prince to seek goodwill as a means of obtaining power, but not to hesitate to be ruthless when necessary. A prince's mind should be ready to turn itself accordingly as the winds and vibrations of fortune force it. Not to diverge from the good if he can avoid doing so, but if compelled, then to know how to set about it. Machiavelli teaches us the need to be ruthless. Not knowing how to be cruel does not make you a higher moral being. It simply makes you a victim to everyone else who can be cruel. Being able to be cruel but disciplining yourself only when it is absolutely necessary earns you the respect of others as well as self-respect. It earns you power. Now, speaking of power, if you're interested in more principles about how to get power, you should definitely watch my video on Robert Greene's 48 Laws of Power. Please let me know in the comments below what you think of Nicolo Machiavelli's work, and that's all for now. Thank you for watching.